what is it about Brooklyn for you? How come all of us seem to gravitate there? Why did Bindlestiff emerge in Brooklyn?
Land was cheap. Warehouses were big and empty. The streets of Williamsburg kept other hipsters away for a long time.
Am I right that the building that you emerged in was also a building that Circus Amok emerged in also?
That's absolutely right. Brooklyn's most famous bearded woman, not only bearded woman, started Circus Amok back in probably the early 90s, late 80s.
Sure.
And has an entire floor on South 11th Street. And there was a third circus there that is long gone. That was a collective of artists who were primarily visual artists, but were sort of using circus iconography, less skill-based. They moved on.
So Adam Realman, you didn't move to Brooklyn for cheap real estate. You grew up in Brooklyn, and yet you came back to Brooklyn.
I moved out of Brooklyn and I work in Brooklyn, but yeah, I grew up in Coney Island. And, I'm running around in the early days, the 70s, the early 80s, and came across Sideshows by the seashore. It was not here last week, but it's here now. What is this? And banners and, a guy outside talking, trying to get me in. And I was
got you in, didn't we?
He got me in and I never left. But it was the most amazing thing because, like I said, it appeared one day and, this guy with a thick Southern accent brings me in, pay the money, and it was just another world, like a portal to another dimension. And what I saw at that show was really the last generation of working real old-time sideshow carnival performers. People like Melvin Burkhart, who originated the Human Blockhead, Otis Jordan, the Human Cigarette Factory, what they called him the ossified man at the Coney show. He had no use of his arms or legs. He would roll cigarettes and smoke them, roll them, light them, and smoke them using only his mouth. And Mike Wilson, the Illustrated Man, these are the people that I saw and was just completely blown away by it. We'd go back week after week after week until eventually I learned how to do some of these things.
So the intention of Coney Island USA, which began in 1980 and went full-time because it is about real estate, and we were able to afford to rent a building on the boardwalk in 1985. The intention was to take underground culture and go public and create, if you will, a national center of Americano Bizarro here in Brooklyn with a sense of place that it belonged in Coney Island. Stephanie, if I'm not mistaken, around 95, 96, you and your co-founder Keith started coming to our second building on Surf Avenue and talked about how you had met working at a restaurant, and on coffee break you were juggling back and forth, or how did that happen? And how did you show up at Coney Island?
Actually, the very first time I saw your sideshow was when you were on the boardwalk, and I had met Kiva at the Pyramid Club on Avenue A, because we were all doing fire there occasionally as guests.
Kiva the Combustible, or if you remember the David Letterman show, the Grinder Girl.
And she asked me to sub for her one day when she was sick or out or pregnant maybe. And I worked on your stage before I even knew that much about Sideshow. Mm-hmm. But what I saw was that Kiva was a fabulous, beautiful woman, a powerful, dynamic performer. It turned my head because I had always thought that Sideshow was, like many people, was part of the carnival arts and was not as theatrical as I've come to see it under your direction. So that was my first introduction to the contemporary sideshow. Other than that, and seeing Jim Rose on, MTV and reading about him and on the Lollapalooza tour. But this was a very direct connection to what you guys were doing there.
So let's get into the first intellectual discussion tonight and talk about the relationship of circus to sideshow. I sometimes like to think that circus and sideshow were brother and sister, and sideshow is the weird little brother of the glamorous big sister. What is the difference between the two? And do they have to be juxtaposed against each other, or do they exist separately as well as together?
Well, traditionally, most traveling circuses had a sideshow, and it was literally the side show. So the circus was the big tent, and the sideshow was a smaller tent that was off to the side, hence the sideshow. And it was in the sideshow that they had kind of the weird, the strange, the bizarre, and the macabre. It wasn't the glossy, big circus acts that that circuses have been known to the trapeze artists. This literally, like Dick said, was kind of the ugly cousin. This had the freaks in it, and over the course of time, the sideshows really kind of faded out of the circuses. It was the 70s, I think, was the last time that Ringling had a sideshow at Madison Square Garden as part of their circus. I think it was mid-70s or so. So, the sideshows at that point, and even before that, really started to sort of fade into oblivion until like the 90s, where there was sort of a resurgence of it.
For freaks, we actually think long and hard about what we do because we're Brooklyn freaks. Stephanie has just returned from Washington, D.C., where she participated in a Smithsonian Institution Circus Folklife event with the National Endowment for the Arts. And preparing for this talk, you made a point of saying you've been doing some thinking of the relationship of circus and sideshow. So what's on your mind?
It's interesting to note the legitimacy of circus as an art form, which is growing in the United States ever since the late 90s, when Cirque du Soleil began to become a seed in the American consciousness of this intensely theatrical, very upscale, expensive experience that completely took the sawdust and the elephant poop out of the experience and elevated this into a theatrical art in our American cultural imagination, leaving the sideshow behind, leaving the messiness behind, the mud lots, all of that stuff. Sideshow is inextricably a part of circus and popular entertainment culture, the way that circus is part of popular entertainment culture. It is and always should be accessible. It should be affordable. It should be relatable to anyone at any age, from any background. And I think sideshow does that because it grabs, in the same way that circus does, it grabs you viscerally. It presents the seemingly impossible. It plays with our notion of danger and the imminence of death and destruction. That's entertaining for us, but it's also very spiritually moving in some way. And in the modern era, and I think it's due to what people like you and kind of the nightclub culture, the underground scene in New York City, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, Chicago. In the 90s, people really started to just mix these mediums together in ways that hadn't been done popularly before. And so you began to see beautiful, dressed drag queens pounding nails into their head. You began to see lots more lady sword swallowers, not necessarily fully tattooed. You began to see fire eating appearing in nightclubs and underground parties. So it just kind of, the 90s began to really bring everything together.
I think it also, like you had mentioned before, Jim Rose, the fact that he was on the Lollapalooza tour back in the early, mid-90s, it certainly catapulted what was really kind of a dying art at that point. You know, like you really didn't have a whole lot of sideshow exposure aside from these, you know, from the nightclubs. And then Jim Rose came along and hooked up with the Lollapalooza tour, and now every major city across the country is being exposed to sword swallowing, to, you know, pincushion acts, to you know, real sideshow stunts.
I'm confused on your behalf. It used to be that the sideshow was considered exploitive, get rid of it. And the circus was all American, wholesome family entertainment. And all of a sudden, the sideshow is super cool and empowering for handicapped performers. And everybody's out to ban the circus. Can you explain that to me?
No. Now what? I mean, you want to take it?
The circus equals animal cruelty. That's what's going on with that. That's why people
But doesn't
immediately
the sideshow
respond.
equate to human cruelty?
Well, there has been, first of all, when the sideshow sort of died away and it went underground and we sort of got excited about it, Jerry Springer got really popular. Human freaks moved from the midway to the TV screen.
America's Got Talent.
Reality TV, hello. Everybody's inner mess revealed in ways that, I mean, emotional and intellectual handicaps are far more lucrative than people who are differently abled now can make a fantastic living as a doctor or a surgeon or an airline pilot or, you know, a senator if they want to. They couldn't do that in the heyday of Sideshow. So there is a change in consciousness, but we are also immensely captivated by seeing other people's mess in public.
I mean, if we look at the history of, you know, what are called freak performers, those that were born different, they were working in sideshows because there was no other place for them to work. It was either work in a sideshow or be committed where nobody will ever see you. You know, literally locked up in a closet somewhere. And, you know, over the course of time, political correctness got, you know, in the way, so to speak. So you're talking, you've had sideshow performers, again, freak performers, going from the turn of the century through, let's say, the 40s and the 50s. And at the 50s, a few things happened. You had television, where why would I go out and pay money to see someone? I could just stay home and watch TV. Movies were a lot more popular. But again, the political correctness is potentially what started to kill off the sideshows because, you know, oh, these people are being exploited. Not these people are working and they're gainfully employed and nobody else would hire them, but they're being exploited. When you look back at history, the Born Differents were the highest paid performers in a sideshow because you can't create that. I mean, you know, anyone can learn to spit fire, but if you're born with 3 legs, you know, how many people are like that? So the political correctness really kind of, you know, that lobby started hammering and, you know, these performers were not working publicly, you know, and again, the times were changing, like Stephanie said, where, you know, we move another 10, 15 years, and they're able to get real jobs, so to speak. You know, you know, people who are born different can work and be your banker and work, you know, in retail and be doctors and lawyers. But now what's happening, there seems to be a resurgence in people who were born different on the sideshow stage. And that is an empowering thing that they themselves are making the choice to say, I want to be in a sideshow, and I want to be seen as who I am with whatever, differentness, if that's even a word, I have to show.
Let's bring it back home to Brooklyn. So, sideshows are a New York City art form. P.T. Barnum opens his American Museum in Manhattan in 1843 at the corner of Broadway and Ann Street, pretty close to City Hall. He is running the most popular tourist attraction in the 19th century in Manhattan. Sideshows begin at Barnum's American Museum. It burns down. He opens a new American Museum on Broadway and Spring Street in what is now Soho. The circus does some performances in Brooklyn. Coney Island emerges as the entertainment capital of popular culture in the world for a period. There are people like Samuel Gumpertz, who starts out as the manager of the Dreamland Circus sideshow, leaves Coney Island and ends up running Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. There are 6, 7, 8 different sideshows competing with each other on Surf Avenue in Coney Island. In our lifetime, we not only have the Bindlestiffs, we not only have Circus Amok. For those of you who are hip and cool, right now we have the House of Yes. We have Russian circus schools in Brooklyn. We have the do-it-yourself warehouse movement. Is it because Brooklyn is multicultural? Is it because Brooklyn is cool, but Brooklyn hasn't always been cool? Why Brooklyn?
Again, it's about affordability, the kinds of large spaces, like anybody practicing circus skills, including aerial and acrobatics, needs a ceiling at least this high. You can't get that you can't touch that in Manhattan anymore. Brooklyn has proximity to Manhattan, though, because a lot of us starting out needed to get to the nightclubs in Manhattan to work and make a living.
And it has the pool of New York City artists and New York City press, which is international press.
When Bindlestiff started to produce and present shows in Williamsburg in 1996, nobody was going to get on the L train and come over here. That was a major battle. And the only, I think Jim Niffle from the Village Voice, the critic who hated everything, he was the most bitter, angry man alive, but he actually did take the L train over and wrote a scathing review of our show, which was awesome because lots of people jumped on the L train after that. But it was impossible to get people over here. But what's really cool now is that Brooklyn is the center of what's happening. Straddling the Long Island City border, there's Circus Warehouse, there's the Muse, there's Streb, there's the House of Yes. These places, first of all, are all run by women. Tanya Solomon, Tanya Gagne's Big Skyworks. There are tons of circus training, Lava, right here in Brooklyn, run by Sarah East Johnson. Tons of circus schools and training spaces and centers of circus culture are like thriving in Brooklyn.
Because Brooklyn's like a cockroach, you can't kill it.
There's a beauty to it. Diversity, there is not enough diversity in terms of who's doing circus and who's performing in circus and who is learning circus. I would love to see more diversity, but where can you get more diverse than in Brooklyn? So we just got to keep at it and keep the doors open until it looks like the rest of Brooklyn in the circus tent.
So I like to brag sometimes that if you're average American suburban teenager has a pierced tongue and tattoos, it's my fault. And it really isn't, but I'm trying to get at something, and I'm proud of that. But seriously, those of you in the audience, think about what the three of us here represent and promote. Most of it used to be banned even in New York City. Sideshows, burlesque shows, pinball, comic books, tattoos, all of those things were banned. Can we hear an applause meter? Who thinks that's bad for American culture? Who thinks it enhances American culture?
I'm confused on your behalf.
Yeah, so was I.
So, do either of you feel guilty that we've dumbed down this country?
No, not at all. It's complete. I mean, what I don't like is like you had mentioned earlier, America's Got Talent, and the stuff that you see on TV, where they don't respect the variety arts. Where how many variety artists go through the final round of America's Got Talent? Like none. They'll pick a singer or I don't even know what. But the variety arts are as mainstream as they might be on network television, they're still not held in high regard. Yep.
So during the week, in the first week of July, I was invited to the National Endowment for the Arts to speak on a panel before the NEA about why circus is an art form. And what lots of people don't know is that circus and sideshow and variety and vaudeville all have roots that go, like many of you probably know this, but not everybody else does, roots that go deep into prehistoric culture, prehistoric ways of being together as a society. Theater, circus, these things kind of predate writing about art or talking about art. They were necessary ritualistic components of what held a society together that have evolved over time, become decorated with spangles and sparkles and bright lights. But this is a very critical part of what can make our culture stronger, is that we can share an appreciation for human talent, human courage, human development, human aspiration. The circus does that, and the sideshow does that. And it also kind of frightens us a little bit and reminds us that we are human and that death is imminent and life is scary, but that's okay. Like, that's what art is supposed to do. And these are things that we're not taught in school. We're taught about ballet, we're taught about opera, we're taught about great legitimate theater. So the task is it's amazing that you're all here and that we get to talk about this. The task is for us to find more ways to talk about this. I work with kids. I make sure I teach the history of what I'm doing, why I love what I'm doing, because it has deep roots.
So both of you are educators. Adam actually is an official teacher.
Yeah.
Adam is the dean of Sideshow School. Stephanie, is the program called the Cavalcade of Youth, or that's just the showcase?
There are two different aspects. There's a program called the Circus After School, which is a social circus program for kids in Columbia County, New York. And the Cavalcade of Youth is a professional development program for kids who are interested in careers in circus and the variety arts.
So I know all three of us are obsessed with teaching safety. When you get into Sideshow Skills in particular, is a niche of the circus arts. Everything is dangerous. And there is an obsession to pass on a way of behavior, a way of performing to do dangerous things as safely as possible. And I know the two of you believe in that as strongly as I do. But because of, especially the TV show America's Got Talent, there's suddenly a one-upsmanship. That the best way for a young person starting out in the sideshow arts, somebody in their 20s, to make a name for themselves is to push the envelope and go farther than somebody else has done. So once we started doing sideshow school and doing sideshows, then somebody comes along, and while a sword is inside of him still swallowed, this individual laid on a bed of nails and had somebody break a cinder block with a sledgehammer while they were doing bed of nails. Dangerous? Yeah. Am I happy about that? No. But then after somebody does that, 2 years later, somebody else comes along and decides with the sword inside of him, he's going to break dance on the floor, or he's going to swallow a sword and not under control. The sword's going to be attached to a chain. The other end of the chain is going to be attached to eye hooks that somebody else in the company, and the person with the eye hooks is going to yank that sword out of the sword swallower's throat, not a controlled removal. And then 2 years later on America's Got Talent, there is an acrobat who swallows a sword and does a backflip with the sword inside of them. How do we stop this one-upmanship that ultimately ends up not in the freak accident some of you might have seen last year, where a flaming sword trick goes wrong and on TV hits somebody in the neck and actually hurts them? But how close are we to somebody dying on that TV show? And what do we do about it as proponents of sideshow
The
arts?
only way that it's going to stop is when someone dies. And it's going to be a result of these TV shows. And that's really because these shows allow the performers to keep pushing the envelope. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I swallow a sword and that's all you're getting. I'm not doing backflips, I'm not doing anything else. And, it's just simple in that if you've never seen a sword swallower, just watching a sword swallower is amazing. So why am I going to now flare it up? To me, I'm not going to put myself at risk. Sorry.
I have to play devil's advocate. Ricky Jay's book, Learned Pigs and Fireproof Women, there were people doing stunts at the turn of the century that nobody does anymore, like strapping a steak onto your back and walking into a furnace to cook the steak. There are also vintage circus posters that depict acts that nobody does anymore, including, maybe even a hair-hanging sword swallower or something like that. People have been doing stuff like this and promoting it and riding the sexy danger of it since promotion became a thing.
So
that's what we do.
Educators, which I'm not, how do you coach your students?
Yeah, well, as far as the sideshow stuff, the sideshow skills, like Dick mentioned, it's doing the dangerous in the safest way possible. So you're going to learn how to do this, whether it's swallowing a sword or snapping a mousetrap on your tongue or eating fire, but it's at your pace as a student, so I'm not going to force you to do anything that you're uncomfortable with. And additionally, it's a very small group instruction. So we're not piling 40, 50 students in a room saying, okay, here's a sword, here's torches, go play. It doesn't work like that. It's done in a very, very, controlled way. Back to those weird acts though. We need a farting act. Bring back a good fart.
Lepidamine. There's in any good pedagogy, there is a series, there's foundational steps that you take. And as you work with kids or adults or teens, you have to make sure, and it's your obligation as somebody who's a coach or an educator, to make sure that the person is firmly based in a foundational, aspect of the skill and the conditioning required before they can move on. And that includes discussion. It includes specifically in circus, anybody who wants to become an aerialist also has to know about rigging, about safely warming up and conditioning their body so that they can handle the stresses that being in the air, requests of the body. When I teach a kid how to crack a whip, I explain to them that the popper is moving over 750 miles an hour when it snaps. That's breaking the sound barrier. You're going to be wearing goggles, gloves, and a leather jacket when you're first learning how to do that. We as educators, it's our responsibility to pass down not just the techniques, but also all the lore, all the horror stories, and all of the resources, because if I don't know how to do something, I'm not going to try to teach you. I'm going to pass you on to my peer who does.
Have either of you been hurt yourself?
Hell yes.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I would say aside from just a few burns from doing fire, and I haven't done fire in a while. But and just to touch on safety and whatnot, and then we'll get back to how I hurt myself. New York City is one of the first cities to have you've got to be a certified fire performer now. So if you are a fire performer and you want to work within the 5 boroughs, you need to go just a few blocks from here down to Metro Tech, take a test, do an interview, and get certified as a fire performer.
And this, I'm sorry to break in, but this is another reason why New York City and Brooklyn, part of New York City, is so cool. So given that there is this underground movement, given that there is this do-it-yourself movement in warehouses, particularly in Brooklyn, the same movement that led to the ghost ship tragedy in Oakland, California, where the warehouse burned. In New York City, the fire department is on our side. The explosives unit of FDNY, instead of closing down underground clubs, wants to work with underground clubs and educate fire performers and license them. And personally, I think one of the greatest honors of my life is that on New Year's Eve in Coney Island, at a national landmark, the parachute jump, with 15,000 people and elected officials in attendance, FDNY thinks it's fine that my performers play with gasoline.
And they're totally cool about it and assist us in setting up and making sure that we have the right safety protocol so that we don't get hurt, so that the 15,000 guests or elected officials don't get hurt.
We probably have about 5-7 minutes before we have to get to the demonstration. So where do we want to go? Do we want to talk about whether being a freak is a pejorative or a badge of honor, or do we want to promote to this audience how people sign up to learn your skills? What do you want to talk about?
Being a freak is good. How do we sign up for the Bindlestiff Cavalcade of Youth?
Well, I've left some flyers on your seats. Bindlestiff.org is our website. If you are a child under 18, or if you have a kid under 18 that's really excited about, actually, we have a Cavalcade of Youth star in the audience tonight. I want to clarify. Wow, that's really loud.
Wait, who is that?
This is Bennett Santora. Stand up and say hello to everybody.
I have a question for you. Do you have any scars?
One, but I got it from falling down in my living room.
So Bindle's, I'm just going to clarify, the Cavalcade of Youth program is not a training program. I can't take any credit for Bennett's immense level of skill, but it is an opportunity for talented youth, kids who are developing skills, kids who are excited about putting an act together, about exploring circus or a variety as a career, to actually perform in a professional venue, which is Coney Island Sideshows by the Seashore, a legendary home of world-class entertainment. And it gives them their first opportunity often to actually perform in front of a paying audience, not just their mom and dad and cousins. So that's what the Cavalcade is.
And I have to thank New York City once again, because thanks to New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and the grants they give in the cultural capital of the world, where to get one of those grants, you are competing with Lincoln Center. You are competing with the Metropolitan Opera. You are competing with ballet companies. And New York City Department of Cultural Affairs gave Coney Island USA a $3.6 million capital grant to buy a landmark building. So New York is a pretty cool place.
Damn straight.
We're not leaving, but I think we are switching over to the dangerous demonstration part of the show. And that will not end the evening. After that, we will do questions and answers.
All right.
I believe we flipped a coin earlier, and Adam will do some sword swallowing for you.
Okay, well, thank you. Now let me ask you this question. How many of you have seen a real live sword swallower before? All right, most of the crowd. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Now the interesting thing is that, as we were talking a little bit earlier, we've got a sideshow school out of Coney Island. I teach the sideshow school. Now, every single one of you here at the Brooklyn Historical Society is going to get a free lesson on how to swallow a sword. Now, I wouldn't recommend trying it at home based on this little lesson, but if it does pique your interest, we've got a class starting in August. It's the third week in August. Check us out at coneyisland.com, Sideshow School, and I'll be the guy to teach you. But the lesson begins with this. In order to swallow a sword, you need two things: mind and body control. Everybody's got what's called a gag reflex, and that's your body's way of telling you you're putting something down your throat that may not belong. I'm talking about a sword. Of course, mind control, you got to convince yourself that swallowing any amount of steel is actually a normal thing to do. Now, I'm doing this for the better part of 16 years already. Mind control, it's easy. It's the gag reflex that at times can trip me up. You're sitting right here in the front there. That's the splash zone, my friend. Let's see if you can guess what I had for lunch. Okay, here we go. First sword. Well, thank you very, very much. But judging from that lukewarm round of applause, I think this crowd at the Historical Society is looking for something a little bit more dangerous. I figured you were, and I think I can accommodate you on that one with a slightly bigger sword. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, which equals a little bit more danger. That's right. But not content with just this bigger tool. Oh no. I like to take the danger level and kick it right up to the roof, and there's only one way that I can do that, and that is by using someone from our audience to assist me. You're sitting right up front. Give her a round of applause. Come on up and join me right over here. I promise it won't hurt you at all. All right, now what was your name? Anea. Anea, hi Anea. All right, I got one question for you. How good are you at following directions? Okay, excellent. Anea, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to swallow this sword. You are going to pull it out after it's deep within. Now let's go over it. This way we know you're not going to mess up, Anaya. You can handle it, I promise. I promise. It's not that difficult, all right? I'll swallow the sword, lean forward towards everybody. As soon as I get to you, you're going to put your hand on the sword. Handle the sword, straight back. Pull, don't push. That's all you need to know. Pull, don't twist. Pull, don't wiggle. You can wiggle, just don't wiggle the sword. You ready, Anaya? You can do this, I promise you. You'll do it. It'll be good, nice and easy. I'll even help you out, all right? All you got to do is put your hand on it, and I'll back up, all right? And of course, after Anaya successfully completes this task, that round of applause is going to be for you. Okay, here we go. A valiant effort right there. Anaya, I want to thank you for trying. Thank you very, very much. A nice effort, totally, totally cool. But now, my friends, what you've just seen is an attempt at the most dangerous act that I do, trusting Anaya to pull it out. She did a good job, started it out for me. I finished it off. What you're going to see right now is the most dangerous sword that I swallow. 27.5 inches of solid Spanish steel. Now let me ask you this question here. Do we have any doctors, nurses, EMTs, medical professionals in our audience this evening? No one that wants to work. I understand that. Okay, that's all right. That's okay. You're going to have to trust me now when I tell you the path that the swords take as they go into my body. The sword goes into my mouth, into my throat. There's a little trap door right around here that separates the digestive tract where your food goes and the respiratory tract, how you breathe. That trap door is called the epiglottis. Now the epiglottis opens up and allows the sword to go all the way down the food tube into the esophagus, stopping right around here where there's another little trap door called the sphincter. This one, not that one. This sphincter opens up, and because of the length of the sword, the point of the sword is going to touch the bottom of my stomach approximately right over here. Now, at any point during the act, if I were to drop that sword with any amount of force, I'd cause a puncture in the stomach, causing internal bleeding, dying right before your very eyes. And while some of you might want to see that, I've got a busy summer ahead. Can't afford that. Of course, if I continue thrusting the sword down, I rip my pants, and it ain't that kind of show, folks. This is about circus and sideshow, not burlesque. So, friends, right now, let's see if I can get 27.5 inches of solid steel down the hatch without a scratch. Now, because this is the most dangerous sword that I saw. The dangers are real. The sword goes right past the heart, the lungs, a lot of other important things in the chest-abdominal region. I'm going to take my applause before I swallow it, just in case it doesn't go as planned. I want to go with a smile on my face. Let me hear you, friends. Come on. Thank you very, very much. That's the way we do it in Coney Island. Now, I'm just warming things up here because Stephanie is going to be coming up in just a second, and let me tell you, this here is a firecracker of an act. So,
well, I just want to say Coney Island traditionally is an immigrant community where the most recent arrivals to New York City, different ethnic groups from different countries, people come for entertainment. They don't necessarily speak English, but every 5 minutes, if somebody eats fire or hammers a nail in their head, you've been entertained, not like on Broadway where you sit in the dark and intellectually think about something in silence. You have visceral entertainment that makes you applaud, scream, throw up, vomit, or just be afraid. So a traditional sideshow gives you 10 different acts, a 10-in-1 circus sideshow. We're giving you 2 tonight. Stephanie, just by the sound of her act, is potentially going to scare you, but understand she's not out to hurt you, just to entertain.
Gravity. It happens. Yeah, remember what I said about breaking the sound barrier? Every little crack of the whip is just this little piece of string moving faster than the speed of sound. So as you can imagine, anything in the way is going to suffer a little damage. Contrary to popular opinion or belief, whips was never designed to strike animals or people. They're used as sound signaling devices, primarily with people who work with large groups of animals like cattle or sheep. But in the circus, in the sideshow, in the rodeo, the whip has become a very fancy entertainment device because that loud cracking sound also can cut like a surgeon's knife. So, I don't know, I thought maybe we'd bring a little danger into tonight's experience. I need a volunteer. Wow. No. You're a little too eager. Plus, I'm afraid you might be a lawyer. You look kind of, no, okay, all right, why not? Come on up. A round of applause for our handsome and intrepid volunteer. Hello, what's your name?
My name is Mark.
Hi, Mark. Come on over here. I'm going to bring you into the light. Yeah, this is probably the best place. Mark, these are your new friends and fans. Fantastic. Well, you look very relaxed and casual for your evening out, but I do have a little accessory for you, Mark. I'm going to ask you to hold this flower in your left hand. Extend it towards the lovely front row there. Mark, I'm going to be over here. I'm going to swing the whip through the air. You'll hear a terrible whistling sound as it gathers speed, and then hopefully your fingers are still where when we started. There we go. Not bad. Oh, lovely. Mark, I don't know about you, but I have a feeling that this audience wants to see a little more danger in tonight's presentation. More danger. Fabulous. Mark, you're going to take this rose, face the back wall here, say hello to Adam and to Dick, our tremendous moderator. All right, so now we're going to do a little stretching exercise, Mark. You're going to reach up with the rose, open your feet about shoulder width, take a deep breath in. And on the exhale, you're going to bend over and reach through your knees and hold. I like to call this one the ring mistress's deadly booty crack. You look great, Mark. Just hold that. Hold that nice and high. Here we go. I'm going to be over here. I'm going to be swinging the whip through the air. You'll hear a terrible whistling sound as it gathers speed, and hopefully everything is where it was when we started. Here we go. Hey! Thank you. Mark, there's just one more thing here. You know, as I looked around this room of beautiful people, I said to myself, that guy has a great smile. So, Mark, you know where this is going, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, indeed. I'm feeling lucky today. Loves me. Loves me not. sorry. No, don't worry. I'm a professional. There you go, Mark. Right there between the choppers. Hands behind your back, Mark. Bend forward at the waist. Keep your feet shoulder width. Get nice and comfortable. I'll be over here. I'll swing the whip through the air. Yada, yada, yada. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You may return to your seated position. Eso! Try it at home, friends.
So, audience, after all of that, I imagine you might have a question or two. Go ahead.
Before we get to questions, I have a wireless mic that I'll be bringing around.
Oh, great.
But I made a little bit of a dig at our friends in Greenwood. Yes, that pun was intentional. I'd like to point out that Greenwood and BHS are great friends, and you can see more of Bindlestiff this weekend, actually, when they'll be performing at a special event at Greenwood Cemetery.
Oh, thank you.
So, this gentleman right there has our first question.
So in your discussion of danger, you pointed out, that people are sort of upping the ante on the stunts that they're doing. But my question is this, is anybody actually looking empirically at, how dangerous it really is? Because a lot of times things that may look dangerous or may seem obvious that they're very dangerous or would lead to injury, so if you looked at, for example, soccer, it turns out soccer is often much more dangerous for kids than football. So, it's not what may be obvious. The empirical study answers the question of what's really dangerous. Is anyone looking at the empirical aspect of the danger here?
You need to understand that unlike magic, which is all about illusion, everything in Sideshow is real. There is no illusion. It's an understanding of human anatomy and what the human body can do. That doesn't mean some acts are more dangerous than others. You might think that the bed of nails is torturous and horrible to endure. That one is a beginner act. It's fairly easy. Sword swallowing, fire eating are extremely dangerous. For the more adventurous and sideshow performers, glass eating is extremely bad for your health, not because your stomach is going to bleed from the glass, but eating glass wears off the enamel on your teeth and your dentist will get mad at you.
I mean, if you look at we're just going to take fire eating, for example. The obvious dangers are burns. But what most people don't realize is that the chemicals from the fuels that are seeping into your body, whether you want them to or not. I mean, you're not taking a swig and drinking, but when you put the fuels in your mouth, they will get into the membranes and will get into your body. And these are cancer-causing fuels. So, how many old fire eaters are there out there? I mean, really, and it's people are doing this, at the Sideshow 6, 7, 10 times a day, putting this fuel in and around their mouth. It's the immediate danger, burning and firing up. But the long-term dangers that people don't look at are cancers and whatnot.
The profession practiced as safely as possible is dangerous enough. It is one of the founders of the movement. I'm very disturbed by the one-upmanship, and I've banned a few performers.
I can speak specifically to circus and say that in Canada, there is empirical research being done on the effects that specific acrobatic tricks and aerial arts are having on performers' bodies. Because in circus, people one-up each other by inventing new tricks and new apparatus. And in Cirque du Soleil's headquarters, there are two kinetic labs, one in which equipment is designed and another in which human bodies are stress tested with the new equipment, with new tricks. the United States is very far behind on this kind of research.
New question.
You could put a man on the moon, right? But you can't.
Yeah, hi. This
Shoot a
is
girl out of a cannon.
terrific performances and show.
Thank
Just to pick up, you were talking about television, reality television. It's more like an episode of The Bachelor here with the roses. But just my opinion, you also mentioned America's Got Talent and how that has, affected your work or you're affecting its work. I think it was just my opinion, but around this time last year, we had a huge bump in the Sideshow effort. I think you remember there was a whole series on TV. It was called The Presidential Debates, which kind of reminded me...
Do not conflate circus or sideshow with politics.
Okay. Okay. So here's my question. With the closure of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, I also noted that there was another missing circus. We used to go in Marine Park to the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers. What happened to those guys?
That's still operating. More tragic is that in the United States of America, there is one black-owned circus. And wonderfully, it's based here in New York City, the Universal Circus. And starting next year, when the city council's ban on exotic animals in circuses go into effect, Universal Circus will not be able to perform in their home base of New York City.
A lot of people ask us, because they know we're circus people, what about Ringling? What about Ringling? I got news for everybody. The future of circus in America is incredibly bright. There are small circuses traveling all over the United States still. Some are under canvas. Universal is a great example. They're all over the Southeast, and they're actually based in Atlanta. They're doing very well, and it's a fantastic show. It's one of my favorite tented circuses still out there. Circus Velasquez comes to New York City. It's a Mexican-owned circus. On the West Coast, there are dozens of small tents now that are founded by people younger than my generation. There's another whole generation of young, excited, passionate people who are buying little tents, putting them on trucks and taking them around the country. So the tented circus is not dead. Ringling didn't take the circus out with it. It just made a little more space for the small guys.
A year ago, the Big Apple Circus went under, and it's back. So, it was resurrected. I just saw an ad on Facebook today, like pre-sale, buy your Big Apple tickets pre-sale. So, that's just, it's terrific.
There's a woman in the third row there who's had her hand up for a while.
Thank you. I have two questions. Stephanie, if you could tell us a little bit about the Folk Life Festival at the Smithsonian. I missed it, but I couldn't believe that was the theme. I thought that was so cool, because usually it's a government agency and a country and a state, and this time it was circus. And Adam, I want you to tell us how you hurt yourself, and I bet you a nickel it was with a hot water bottle.
All right. Well, Stephanie goes first.
You go first. I want to hear about that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I have hurt myself with a hot water bottle. I do an act where those rubber hot water bottles, I inflate it, using just lung power, and you never know when it's going to burst, and it burst. It hit me right here. Now I was wearing safety goggles, glasses, but it hit me right. I was red for about 3 or 4 days. It didn't cut skin, but I've got cuts on my neck and my arms from doing the act. And then I've also scratched myself really, really badly swallowing this sword. This is years, 12, 13 years ago. I was doing 3 shows at Caroline's Comedy Club for Luis Jimenez, like a radio DJ. on Spanish radio. First show of the night, swallowed the sword, and it's scratched. And now I feel my throat, you know, by the end of that set, it felt like I had a marble in my throat. Now come the second show, and I did it again, was okay, it didn't scratch it worse, but it felt at this point like I had a golf ball in my throat. And I couldn't do anything. Went over to the producer and said, look, can I swap it out with another act? And her responses were, paying you to swallow swords, you're going to swallow swords. And I learned a lesson that night, which was, they're paying me, so you got to do it. And I swallowed the sword, you know, the last set for the last show. And I mean, it took about over a week to, you know, for this to heal. I mean, luckily, it was nothing worse than that.
Yikes. The Smithsonian Folklife Festival this year honored American Circus. It was the 150th anniversary, I think, or no, sorry, the 50th anniversary of the festival. It also honored migration, which is amazing because the traveling circus has always been a community unto itself, and it's always here in America since its debut in 1793 has been an international community moving around. This is a really cool happening. Over the 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of July, 500 circus artists, researchers, academics, ephemera collectors, historians, and fans came together to create a circus city on the National Mall in Washington. Circus Sarasota brought a beautiful big top tent. A couple of dozen different shows rotated through that tent, including Bindlestiff. There was a collection of small tents in which the public, the thousands of people who visited over the 2 weeks, could experience juggling. They could sit down and talk about, listen to the history of clowning, listen to panels like this one, discuss the art of clowning, juggling, what it's like to live on the road in the circus. Like there was a circus cookhouse, so you could experience what it would be like to eat on the circus train. So really, they tried to represent many different facets of circus life. And in the Arts and Industries building itself, which is a beautiful historic building with a really high ceiling, there was a circus school, so you could watch people training and learning circus technique. There were 3 or 4 different venues in which circuses were performing, and really 500 circus practitioners assembled together. It was an incredible experience, and the public came and supported it, and I think hopefully went away with a little bit more knowledge of the richness of this as an art form.
Next question.
Hi. I'm not one right now, but usually I'm a mime. So my question actually is in regards to, I guess, clownism and mime. I've definitely felt the pressure and felt like I've needed to kick down a lot of doors to get into shows because you don't really see a lot of mimes. They're there, we're here. You can't really hear us, but yeah, so I guess my question is, especially with like Cirque du Soleil and all of these new visual arts that are coming out that are so enhanced by like overstimulation of just visual aspects and audio aspects, I guess where would you see the future, I guess, being, could the mimes really like come back and take it by storm? Should I turn over to the dark side of the clown and become a clown? I mean, I phase in and out mostly the clown sells way more in New York, but my passion is really for mime. So my concern has always been like, how can I break that barrier? How can I make it new? How can I make it different? How can I just be seen and not heard?
That is a really great question, and you're right. I don't know a lot of mimes working in New York City right now. I think that what's happening with circus, sideshow, vaudeville, burlesque is that our arts are not only merging together to create new ways of seeing and experiencing these forms, but they're also moving out into other realms. So specifically, clown, mime, some circus techniques like juggling are really being explored for use in therapeutic settings. in working with people with physical, emotional, mental disabilities, in order to facilitate communication, mind-body integration, left-right integration. There are so many different ways that you can take circus skills and turn them into a life and a career, that you can sort of make your own path. There is no wrong way to do it. One more quick thing, Bindlestiff has the open stage variety show, which is open to any and all performing artists in the circus and variety fields, and that's the first Monday of every month at Dixon Place Theater. I'll talk to you after.
You don't need the mic, go for it, you're not.
So it's been funny now what you just spoke about. As an educator, performer, and newbie-ish circus artist, do you think, is there a path toward becoming a circus educator? And is it very DIY, just get out there and like do it yourself and just figure it out that way? Or do you think there are actual programs available? I'm also interested, like my background is also in special education, so I'm interested in seeing what can be brought in for children and adults with, sensory issues and what that means, also deficits and other, there's a lot of layers to it. Is there a path, you feel like?
Yes, this is a really exciting time if you're an academic, an educator, a researcher, specifically about children and circus and what it can do across the board, physically, emotionally, cognitively. There's a lot of research. There's a great website called the American Youth Circus Organization. There is an entire section that's devoted specifically to academic research on using circus in different capacities as an educator. There is a group of academics who are in touch with each other and networking to develop more research. There are training programs specifically, how to develop a pedagogy, how to develop safety programs, skills, where to order equipment. There's a lot of, and there are a couple of people who are building props specifically adapted for use by people who are differently abled, so it's there. It's there.
I only saw the newspaper coverage after the performances were over, but I heard about one of the local circuses that came to town that was experimenting with multi-person costumes similar to what was used in the play War Horse to represent elephants. And I was wondering if any of you saw that and how well it worked and whether that's a viable technique to maybe revive circuses without raising the animal rights issues.
I did see that show. It was called Circus 1903. Did you see it? No. Yeah, it was a beautiful... Again, we're in an exciting time when there are no more rules about how artists can work together and collaborate. I love to see multimedia and circus work together, circus and dance, circus and puppetry. I think this is a really great thing.
There's a question right there.
Coming for you.
Thank you very much. Really lovely program. You've talked about the community of performers. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that plays into the support of each other, and also the role of sort of oral traditions, sharing stories that you know as part of, you talked about that as part of the responsibility of teaching. I'd like to hear a little bit more about those oral traditions.
Well, I think that because of social media and its popularity now, finding circus performers all over the world is a lot easier. Even, let's say, 16 years ago, I took Sideshow school. I saw that because I'm on the internet, on the Coney Island site. You can actually learn this. But prior to Sideshow school, you had to learn these acts. You had to basically badger a carny. You had to find a performer and beg them to teach you how to do this. So, I mean, we're making it nice and easy now. But, which again, it's how I learned. But social media definitely plays a part of it because, you can be friends with circus folk in Australia and, all over the world and see what they're up to and meet up, and, it helps booking gigs. If I know I'm going to be out in Vegas, I'll, email, oh, hey, what's going on in Vegas? A show that I could jump in on, or, whatever it might be.
We're in an era where, Dick, you've worked directly with people like John Bradshaw and Ward Hall and Otis Jordan. Like the sideshow greats, a few of them are still with us. You have received the transmission. You know the stories. You sat through the endless BS sessions, and so have I. Like Todd Robbins is another one. Like in this particular business, I feel like the jackpots, which is the late night storytelling, is how these things get passed on. It's a really important tradition. And we're performers, like we love to BS. We're very florid when we tell stories. We love to wow each other. We love to one-up each other in terms of,
Like you're always on stage.
the worst show I ever did, the best gig I ever did. It's pretty amazing.
Carney life, sideshow life, comes down to a very simple code, and I think it's very profound. With it, for it, never against it.